was a great player at Hampton-Sydney, and we're glad he chose Roanoke instead of Hampton-Sydney. And he's just an ultimate competitor. Every day he comes hard to practice. Every day he works hard. He's a great student as well in the classroom. So he's very much a person that's loved here at Roanoke College. We're surely going to miss him.
I was thinking about it the other day. I was talking with my dad on the phone, and I remember sitting on the couch in my living room at home, just thinking, man, I hope to eventually play by my junior year.
In other capacities. Now they want the chance to take on a new role. Tonight, the two candidates hoping to represent the Democratic Party will square off on the issues facing your hometown. This is Debate Night on WDBJ-7, the race for governor.
Good evening and welcome to Virginia Western Community College here in Roanoke, Virginia, the site of tonight's debate between the two Democratic candidates for governor. I'm Jean Jadhan, a news anchor with WDBJ-7, the CBS affiliate here in Roanoke, Virginia, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. Sitting beside me, Christian Heilman, who will be handling timing of tonight's questions and answers. Now, both of the candidates have agreed to the format. That includes time for a 90-second answer, a 60-second response, and a rebuttal if the other candidate mentions the other in his response or if the answer warrants a rebuttal. Both will start with an opening statement, and then at the conclusion, both will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. We have asked the audience to hold off on applause until the end of tonight's debate. Now, though, it is okay to applaud as we welcome to stage the two candidates for governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, current Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam,
and the Garden of Eden is
and former Congressman Tom Perriello. Good evening, gentlemen. And they're getting the applause out now. As determined by that coin toss earlier today, Lieutenant Governor Northam will begin first. 2 minutes. Good evening.
Thank you, Jean. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Roanoke Valley Democratic women, and also, Jean, thank you for moderating tonight, and Tom, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here tonight. It is great to be back in the Star City. I have some great memories of Roanoke, having graduated from the Virginia Military Institute in 1981 and then going off to the Virginia Medical School. I served 8 years in the United States Army, taking care of wounded soldiers during Desert Storm. You know, what we saw in Washington today as a doctor who is taking care of many children and their families is very distressing, very concerning to me. Congress took their first step today to repeal the Affordable Care Act, putting at risk hundreds of thousands of Virginians for their health care across the Commonwealth, especially those with pre-existing conditions. You know, I can't predict the future, but I will tell you that we're all going to have a day when we need to go see the doctor, and Washington has turned their backs on us. As a doctor, I want to make sure that we have someone in the governor's office who will make sure that all Virginians have access to affordable and quality health care. No individual in Virginia should be a medical illness away from either death or financial ruin. You know, as a doctor, I've gone around and listened to a lot of people across the Commonwealth. They want a job that they can support themselves and their families with. They want to make sure that their families have access to affordable health care. They want to make sure that their children have access to a world-class education system, and they want to live in communities where there are not guns on every street. They also want someone that will stand up to the hatred and the recklessness of what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now. So I look forward to continuing to promote economic opportunity for all Virginians, no matter who they are, no matter where they are. I want to make sure that our children have the same opportunities that I had, and that our families had the same opportunities to raise their children that Pam and I had. I look forward to sharing my vision for Virginia with you tonight. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for listening.
Congressman Tom Perriello, your opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this event, and thanks to everyone watching at home and here today. I came today excited to talk about our positive vision of how we can provide 2 years of debt-free community college, trade school, or apprenticeship program to every Virginian, how we can provide 8 weeks of paid family leave for everyone working in Virginia, how we can pursue meaningful criminal justice reform that ensures that a school-to-prison pipeline becomes a school-to-workforce pipeline. These programs have all been proposed in our campaign, and every one of them has been paid for in our proposals. But unfortunately, something happened today, as Dr. Northam mentioned, that has to be discussed. I know many people coming home from work now haven't had a chance to catch up on what happened in Washington. But unfortunately, a group of congressmen caved into the bullying of the White House and the bullying of the insurance companies and set us back a decade on affordable care here in Virginia. Over 600,000 Virginians could lose their affordable care access under this reform plan that many who voted for it this morning admitted they had not even read the bill or had the courage to hold a single hearing where they could hear from their constituents what it would mean to upend their life by reinstituting lifetime caps, by bringing back the threat of pre-existing conditions that could deny coverage, of changing the essential benefits package that I was proud to fight for as someone who voted for the Affordable Care Act. And they'll be handing that to the states. One of the guarantees alone, just the guarantee of pre- and postnatal care, could mean that the price of a pregnancy in Virginia could increase by $15,000 per person. The cost of premiums for someone with breast cancer could go up $25,000 a year. This is going to be handed to the states. And we need a governor who will fight back against the insurance companies and the lobbyists in the same way I was willing to do that in Washington, even at great political price. I believe I'm the Democrat that gives us the best chance to win in this November and a guarantee that we will stand up and put patience and affordability first for every family in Virginia. Thank you.
We're going to start with Mr. Perriello. The first question directed to you, and then, of course, Lieutenant Governor, you will have time for a response. The unemployment rate in Virginia is 3.8%. We know that came out recently, but we know that is not a true reflection of Southside and Southwest Virginia. Is Virginia doing enough to attract businesses to this area of Virginia? As governor, what would you do specifically to bring more high-paying jobs to the regions of the state that are still hurting?
Well, you know, the unemployment rate actually tells us less and less these days than it used to. For one, it leaves out the regional variation that you mentioned. As someone who represented Southside, I know that unemployment rate can be so much higher there. But it also discounts the fact that many Virginians have stopped looking for work altogether, or what we see too often is people having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to be able to pay their bills. We have a minimum wage in Virginia that's a poverty wage at only $14,000 a year, which means most people are having to work at least 2 of those minimum wage jobs in order to be able to support their family. We need to make sure that we're looking at an inclusive economy that actually pays people a dignity wage they can support their families with. That's why we need to move in the direction of ensuring 2 years of debt-free workforce development. We need to go in this economy from a K through 12 education program to a P through 14 education program with a universal pre-K year and at least 2 years of skills training for everyone to be able to move into the workforce. We do need to attract businesses in, but you know what? It's a lot cheaper to help the businesses that are already here to grow and expand. For only about $1,500 per job, we can help those great business owners here who are trying to put Virginia at the forefront of the clean energy economy, trying to bring back local food production and manufacturing production. That's what we did in Southside Virginia by putting it at the heart of the new energy economy. But unfortunately in Virginia, we face Dominion Power and electric utilities that stand in the way of that innovation and try to control with the command and control economy that's crushing tens of thousands of jobs that could be created around Southside and Southwest. We will stand up and make sure Virginians and small businesses have the chance they deserve.
Mr. Northam.
Thank you. I've been very proud to work with Governor Terry McAuliffe and our Attorney General Mark Herring developing the new Virginia economy. We have brought in over 190,000 new jobs to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Over $16 billion of capital investment have come into the Commonwealth, and our unemployment, just as Gene said, has gone from 5.4 to 3.8. It's the lowest that it's been in 9 years. It's the second lowest in the south of the country, but it's not working for everybody. I can tell you on the Eastern Shore, where I'm from, the South Side and the Southwest, it is nowhere near 3.8%. So we have to reach out to all of Virginia, especially rural Virginia. Things like access to universal broadband, cell coverage, our opioid crisis is hurting families across the Commonwealth. And finally, one of the things that I would really like to work on to open up the South Side and the Southwest is not only to bring Amtrak to the city of Roanoke, but then to take it to Christiansburg and out to Bristol. We need better transportation. We need a way for people to get out to the western part of our state, and I will promote that as the next governor of the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor, let's talk a little bit about something Mr. Perriello mentioned just a moment ago. We know that you both support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But many small business owners, when you talk to them, say That's going to put me under. What message do you have for small business owners who are already struggling to pay their employees now?
Well, I am a small business owner, and back in 1996, about 30 pediatric subspecialists. I'm a pediatric neurologist. We started Children's Specialty Group. We have now grown. We have over 100 pediatric subspecialists and employ about 250 people. So I am well aware of what it takes to start a business, grow a business, and make sure a business thrives. We have talked about taxes, and one of the things that I do support across the Commonwealth of Virginia is a comprehensive tax reform. We need to have a tax structure that works for all Virginians, for all businesses, and it needs to be fair, it needs to be progressive, and it needs to be simpler. And so one of the things that I have proposed as part of that tax plan is to scale back or even get rid of the food tax for those of low socioeconomic standing. It's a very regressive tax, and so at the end of the day, I will bring people from both sides of the aisle together to talk about a comprehensive tax reform plan. We will then be able to move it through the Senate and the House, and then finally we'll have it signed by the governor. But that's very important. Also, as far as a small business owner, in addition to taxes, I would tell you that workforce development is important. We need to make sure that we're training Virginians for 21st century jobs, STEAM-related jobs, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. That's what we need to focus on as we move forward into the 21st century.
Mr. Perriello, same question, your response. And again, what do you say to small business owners about specifically the $15 an hour? Not talking about all the other, but the $15 an hour, the small business owners who say, I can't afford this.
I understand the concern. The good news is the evidence. If you actually look, when the minimum wage is increased, small business benefits. In fact, the two industries that are most worried about this are the first that do benefit. That's the restaurant sector and the hospitality sector. We've been told for 30 years a myth that when we do this, it actually hurts small business. But we should be driven by evidence. The fact of the matter is, when the working class has a little bit more money in their pockets, the first thing they're likely to spend it on is finally being able to take their family out to eat. And maybe, God forbid, take their first weekend vacation that they've had in 5 or 6 years. The fact of the matter is, we've been told that trickle-down economics, when we give tax cuts for the rich, it'll trickle down growth to the rest of us. It just doesn't happen to be true. Growth comes from the bottom up and from the middle out. It's based on the purchasing power of working and middle-class folks. That's what's been getting crushed in Virginia and around the country, and that's the way we grow small business, is to make sure that there's actual disposable income in the community that won't be spending it virtually or investing in offshore funds, but will be investing it right here in Virginia. That's how we grow the economy and give people the dignity of a living wage.
Mr. Perriello, you mentioned that you would like free community college for Virginians, as well as free pre-K education. On Friday, you proposed raising the income tax on wealthy Virginians and also making it harder for corporations to minimize their tax burden as ways to pay for it. But at a time when Virginia is already trying to attract and retain businesses, wouldn't the latter be like stealing from Peter to pay Paul?
It really wouldn't, for the same exact reasons. We actually know what works. When we invest in the P through 14 education system, it's one of the most important ways that we can attract businesses to our community. And the fact of the matter is, 2/3 of the largest corporations in Virginia pay no taxes at all. It's not fair that the biggest companies that can hire lots and lots of lawyers get to play by a different set of rules than small businesses and farmers. During the recovery in the 1990s, 70% of new businesses were in small and medium-sized towns. That was a crucial part of a resilient recovery. In this time, unfortunately, it's only been 17% in medium to small towns. That's because small businesses don't get the fair shot that the big corporations get. When we level that playing field and actually increase growth by investing in workforce development, it gives us the kind of growth that Southside and Southwestern Virginia need, and it gives us the fairness of growing the middle class instead of consolidating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. That's actually an anti-growth strategy. The Republicans in Richmond have been pursuing an anti-growth, pro-consolidation strategy. We need to start reinvesting in farmers and small business who actually make and build things instead of just speculating and trying to grow the economy around that. Our tax code is vital. Everything that we propose is paid for, including the universal pre-K and the 2 years of community college, so that we have people at a starting wage they can support a family with, headed into a career, instead of into a cycle of debt and a minimum wage job that doesn't get us where we need to go. This is not a handout. This is an investment in growth. Virginia can't afford not to do this.
Mr. Northam?
We want everybody to be able to live the American dream. And so one of the things that we have worked very hard on, Virginia, is college affordability, making sure that everybody can go to a four-year college if they so choose. But you know, the 21st century jobs, a lot of them are what we call new collar. You don't have to go to a four-year school. You can go to a community college and get a certification or an apprenticeship program and have a very good, high-paying job. I introduced the G3 program, get skilled, get a job, and give back. I have also been very involved in my last 3.5 years as Lieutenant Governor to promote pre-K education. I helped to apply for a federal grant 3.5 years ago of $70 million to jumpstart pre-K so that all children across Virginia could have that opportunity. Just this year, we added 13,000 more positions for pre-K education across Virginia. And I have continued to work out. This is a bipartisan project. We're working both publicly and with private groups, companies. People realize the importance of pre-K. So I will continue to promote pre-K education across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it won't take a tax increase. Silence.
Silence.
Reflecting.
We're back to you, actually. And I wanted to elaborate just a little bit more on the support for free community college, which we know that you have both said you support. And Mr. Northam, you had said you support for some Virginians as well as pre-K. Can you explain a little bit more in detail how you would pay for that? I think you may have answered part of this, but more specifically, we know Mr. Perriello said he would include a tax increase on Virginians. Would you raise taxes on Virginians to get the pre-K and community college, the free pre-K and community college programs through?
No, I believe we have a plan for both of those that won't require a tax increase. Let me talk to you a little bit more about my G3 program. We know that there are a lot of what I call new-collar jobs. These are high-demand, high-tech, highly skilled jobs that you don't necessarily need to go to a four-year college or education for. And so what I did is introduced a program which is called the G3 program. It stands for Get Skilled, Get a Job, and Give Back. So people will be able to go to community college in these high-demand areas with the understanding, for free, with the understanding that if they become certified in one of these areas, then they will give 1 year back in public service, at which time they'll get paid. So it's not like they're out there working for free. There is an initial investment. It's around $37 million. But if you carry it out for 5 years, it actually pays back. People will now have higher paying jobs, so more tax revenue will come into the Commonwealth. So it's a win-win situation. And I would just remind folks, there's no free lunches out there. We have to be realistic with the people. You know, the United States Army put me through college, put me through medical school, and then 6 years of training for pediatric neurology. And then I gave back 8 years to my country. I think that's a great way to move forward. And you know, the best thing about it is when I got out of the Army in 1992, I didn't owe anybody a penny. I actually had money in my pocket, so I was ready to go. So there are a lot of options out there, but this plan, this G3 plan, follows in line with what I've been able to do. You get skilled, you get a job, and then you give back.
Thank you.
Yes.
Your response?
This is a bit of a fundamental disagreement about what the problem is. In Charlottesville, is a great town where I'm from, over 25% of families still live below the poverty line. A friend of mine runs a program trying to help single moms move back into the workforce. And they found that, frankly, finding a job less than $28,000 a year doesn't do any good because it doesn't even cover child care and transportation costs. That happens to be what $15 an hour is. There were over 200 jobs in Charlottesville hospitals last year paying $28,000 a year or more that were unfilled last year. And all that was required was an 8-week certificate. When we go and give that person an 8-week certificate and cover them with a loaner vehicle to be able to move into that job, they don't need to go do community service. We have a private sector job ready to pay them a living wage with a dignity. And the return to the taxpayer is less than 6 months of moving that person from public assistance to being a taxpayer job with the dignity to look their kids in the face and know they've come home in time to tuck them into bed. When we see this, we don't need people giving back in service. We have a private sector with jobs ready to hire people if we help them just a little bit to get that certificate and have the dignity of the kind of job they can support a family with.
Mr. Northam,
May I
rebuttal?
respond to that? Since
Yes.
there was a disagreement in our policies, I want to tell folks that I have been in Richmond for 10 years. I understand how to get things done. We have a Republican-controlled House and Senate right now. My opponent, and I'll just use a ballpark figure, has proposed a $1 billion tax increase across the Commonwealth of Virginia. I can just tell you that's not going to fly in Richmond. And so we need to talk about how are we going to get these things done. I just gave you a proposal for how I pay for 2 years of community college, and I also reviewed how I pay for pre-K and what we've been doing to make that happen.
All right. Thank you,
Community
gentlemen.
service makes it more expensive, not less expensive. How does that pay for the plan?
Did me serving for 8 years in the United States Army make it more expensive, Tom?
The military program is its own program. You and I both love it and honor that. But someone going to do community service in their community is something that costs an additional program to support.
So you're telling me that people like me shouldn't serve in the United States Army or shouldn't give back public service because it's more expensive to our society?
I think you just
Really?
lost the audience, Doctor.
No, I didn't.
I think that the problem here is you're saying that single mom who could move into a private sector job in 8 weeks and be able to go home and see her kids and know she's making $28,000 a year, you want her to go do community service between the
more
babysitting
expensive to
time
our
and the work?
society.
We need her to move into that job and have the dignity of that work. It's why we all benefit each other. When we make a little bit of investment
All right,
and
Mr.
workforce
Perriello,
development,
you've made your
we're all
point.
stronger for it.
10 more seconds, Mr. Northam, if you'd like to respond, and then we're going to a break.
I think I made my point. Thank you
All right.
so much.
We will be right back with a lot more issues to talk about tonight.
And be able to go home and see her kids and know she's making $28,000 a year. You want her to go do community.
Stand by. Welcome back to the debate between the Democratic candidates for governor. We begin our next segment with Lieutenant Governor Northam and a question on the pipeline. Your opponent has strongly opposed 2 natural gas pipelines that are now proposed in Virginia and has suggested you're ducking the issue. What is your position? Where do you stand on the pipelines? Are you for or against them?
You know, one of the questions that I often am asked, Gene, is why a pediatric neurologist would get into politics. And, you know, I want to remind people, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. It was literally my backyard. And over my 50-plus years, I watched the demise of the Bay. So I said I can either be a bystander or I can get in there and try to make a difference and improvements. And I have been one of the leading fighters for our environment across the Commonwealth of Virginia. I took the phosphorus out of fertilizers to help clean up the Bay. I have been a candidate, the only statewide elected official that was outspoken against offshore drilling. I have been opposed to fracking. I've been opposed to uranium mining. So I hope people know my record. Regarding the pipeline, if it moves forward, it needs to be done with transparency and science. And there are a couple areas that I think we need to really focus on. One is property rights. We need to be very sensitive to people's property rights that the pipeline is going through. We also need to be sensitive regarding the environment. And I was the only one on this stage that actually wrote a letter to the DEQ and had communication with the DEQ to do what I could as Lieutenant Governor through the executive branch to make sure that we changed from blanket permitting to a site-specific permitting, which they followed my lead on. At the end of the day, I think everybody needs to realize in the Commonwealth of Virginia that this is an interstate project. It goes from West Virginia through Virginia into North Carolina. So at the end of the day, FERC, or a federal agency, will be the one that makes that final determination.
Mr. Perriello?
I do oppose the two pipelines, and I'm the only one on this stage who's refused to take any money from Dominion Power and the other electric utilities and monopolies that the government should be keeping an eye on instead of being funded by. When we got into this race, I asked two questions. Is there any authority to do something about this, and do we have a better idea? The fact of the matter is, spending $6.7 billion on two pipelines that they have not even proven a need for is exactly the wrong direction instead of investing in the kind of job-creating programs that could put people to work tomorrow on weatherizing homes, on building wind and solar, on refurbing existing infrastructure. It's true he submitted a letter, which was done after I had gotten in the race and opposed the pipeline, and you say you're for transparency. But last week you refused to answer the question of whether you had met with Dominion privately before submitting that letter. We believe this is a time where we need to be transparent, but we also need to be strong. This is not just about climate change. This is about returning to a monopoly economy that closes out small business and farmers, or are we going to create jobs in areas of Southside and Southwest that are the jobs of the future? I believe Virginia deserves the jobs of the future.
And Mr. Northam, you do have 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Can you say yes or no for or against the pipeline, or are you not going to be clear on a yes or no?
You know, I think I explained my position on the pipeline, and again, at the end of the day, it's not something. It's not something that a governor or a lieutenant governor can make a decision on. I can tell you, though, that if the pipeline moves forward, I will make sure that it's done with transparency and with science, like I just explained.
Mr. Perriello, you talked a little bit at the beginning of the, and thank you, Mr. Northam. You talked a little bit at the beginning, as you both did, about the about health care. Aetna this week, given the news that Aetna, big insurer, announced it is pulling out of Virginia because it's losing money, giving Virginians fewer choices, and Speaker Ryan's declaration that Obamacare doesn't work if Americans don't have choices, doesn't that indicate that there are some major flaws in the Affordable Care Act?
Well, first of all, what it indicates is that there are real lives that they're playing with these games in Washington. The sort of things President Trump has done and the House did today immediately puts our health care exchanges at risk by introducing this kind of uncertainty, as they have done now for several years. This is a time where we should be making the Affordable Care Act stronger, not weaker. We should be figuring out ways to make sure there's greater coverage and greater affordability. I supported a public option within the Affordable Care Act, which I think would have created greater choices for all consumers and at least one affordable option in the exchange. But what we saw again today was the possibility that we will reopen, the ability to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, the ability to not cover essential benefits like pre- and postnatal care. And we have seen over the last few years, for all of its challenges, that people are paying about $3,500 less per year in their premiums because of bending the cost curve that was done under the Affordable Care Act. Where there's greater competition, that's a good thing. That's why I supported a bipartisan effort in Congress to remove the antitrust provisions from the insurance companies, which are long overdue to ensure greater competition in these areas. In Virginia, we also need to make sure that we get the Medicaid expansion through that will cover 400,000 Virginians, including desperately needed addiction and mental health services. And it doesn't just help those struggling working poor who would get coverage. It helps all of us with private insurance because those costs are immediately moved on to those of us that have private insurance. It's morally wrong and economically wrong. The Republicans in Virginia have been trying to do this, and that Donald Trump has put these health care exchanges at risk.
As a doctor, I want to tell you all that there's some great things about the Affordable Care Act. No more pre-existing conditions, being able to keep your children on your policy till they're 26, the emphasis on access to women's reproductive health care, access to mental health care, and access to preventive care. You know, one of the things that I have told people all along as a doctor, that there are good things about the Affordable Care Act, and there's some things that we need to fix. But let's not make it a political football. Let's bring people to the table and figure out what's good about it and what's not, and make it better for all Americans. You know, one of the things that I have led the fight for, and unfortunately we haven't gotten there, is Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion is intended to offer coverage for up to 400,000 working, and I would underline the working Virginians. Also, from a business perspective, every day that Virginia doesn't expand Medicaid, we're not only leaving on the table, but giving to our neighbors over $5 million a day. Since January of 2014, we have given away over $10 billion with a B dollars that we could be bringing back to the Commonwealth. So there are no more excuses. Virginia needs to expand Medicaid. Thank you.
Mr. Northam, this question is directed first to you, and it also comes from a viewer through social media. This area of Virginia overwhelmingly voted for Trump last November. The first part of this question, in the general election, why do you feel that you would be better suited to convince a Trump support to vote for you over the Republican nominee? And a viewer, Ann Hunt, wants to know, what is your plan for gaining Democratic votes and support in the far southwest and other very rural parts of Virginia where Republicans have a stronghold?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And, to your point, Hillary Clinton won Virginia by 5 points, but she lost rural Virginia about 80-20. So we have to ask ourselves, why is that? And I can tell you that growing up in a very rural part of Virginia over on the Eastern Shore, I ran back in 2007 against an 8-year incumbent. It was a 42% Democratic district. People said it could never be done. They said I couldn't win. But you know what? I went out and listened to people and heard what they were saying. And at the end of the day, I was successful. In 2013, I ran in a very tough primary across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then in a general election, I received more votes statewide than any Virginia candidate ever has in an off-year election. I know how to win in tough elections, and I know how to win in rural Virginia. And I would just tell you, at the end of the day, what we need to do in rural Virginia is go out and listen to what they're having to say and say, you know what, we're here to help you with things like access to affordable health care. We're here to help you with education for you and your children, workforce development. And at the end of the day, we're here to help you with 21st century jobs, the STEAM-related jobs that I was just talking about. And we've been very proud. Terry McAuliffe and I have traveled around rural Virginia talking about things like cybersecurity, alternative sources of energy, biotechnology, data collection, data analysis. That's where the 21st century jobs are. So we really need to reach out to rural Virginia and let them know that we're there to help them.
Mr. Perriello, 60 seconds.
Well, I think one of the reasons that I can reach these voters is I've done it before. I was able to get elected in the 5th District of Virginia, covering the Southside Virginia District, and won the respect of a lot of people, even those who may not have agreed with me on every issue politically. You do 3 things. You show up, you listen, and then you have to have something to say. And I always assume I have a lot to learn when I go to counties in any corner of Virginia. I believe right now people feel like they're regions that have been left behind because they have been left behind. People feel like the system has been rigged against certain regions and the working middle class because it has been. And that's why when I do things like refuse money from Dominion Power and those who run the show in Richmond, we are appreciated not just among our own progressive coalition, but among many Trump supporters who believe the elites in both parties have left them behind. We also have 7% of voters in Virginia who voted third party this year, who really are not sold on either party. And we believe that standing up for a strong economic agenda of opportunity that leaves no region or race behind is part of how we provide that. Universal pre-K is a life changer for many families, as is a pathway into a living wage job in the workforce. We're already doing it on this campaign, and we'll continue to do it going forward.
Did you want the opportunity to? Okay, we have another viewer question, and this we'll start with Mr. Perriello. We know that Democrats will most certainly not control the General Assembly. Even if the Democrats take the Senate, it's almost impossible for them to take the House of Delegates. That leads us to this next question from viewer Jill Marie Weaver, who says, I would like to know how the candidates plan to work to get things done in this bitter political climate. Mr. Perriello, you are first.
Well, thank you very much. I've actually worked as a peace negotiator in Afghanistan and different parts of Africa, and frankly, I think we could use a little peace negotiating in Richmond as well. We have to find a way to bring together groups who, while we disagree on many things ideologically, I think at the end of the day care deeply about our families, about our communities, and about the fact that it seems to have gotten harder and harder to make it to the middle class and stay in the middle class once you get there. I believe we can find common ground on the fact that we need to start treating addiction as a health crisis and not a criminal crisis. We need to start taking the mental health crisis seriously, which we hear from law enforcement every day is a situation where they're being asked to be the mental health providers of first resort, often in situations that are already tragic in nature. We can agree that childcare has become too expensive and that universal pre-K is a crucial step for early childhood development. What I'm finding in going to some of the reddest counties in Virginia is that ultimately underneath this, people want to make sure that everyone's treated with dignity and respect. So we can bring people together. One of the reasons when Democrats ask why I'm spending so much time out in red country or Trump country, it's because there's a lot of pain there and there's a lot of potential there. And ultimately, my goal is not to gain a title of being governor, it's to govern. And I want to be able to come into the General Assembly next year and have people know that I care about their communities, I've spent time in their communities, and that there's an awful lot we share and can move forward together. Thank you.
Mr. Northam, how
Yes.
would you work to get things done in this bitter political climate? A question
Thank
from
you,
the
Gene.
viewer.
You know, I think we all realize after we've been in politics, and especially in Richmond for a little while, that nobody has a monopoly on ideas, and I've learned that. And you know, one of the first pieces of legislation that I introduced back in 2008 was the smoking ban in restaurants. I knew as a pediatrician that it was dangerous for people to be exposed to secondhand smoke, and I had it passed in the Senate, and it caught a bit of a fever in the House. They defeated it the first year. I went back and I worked with people like the Speaker of the House, the Appropriations Chairman, Chris Jones, Kirk Cox, people on the other side of the aisle, and I said, you know what, guys and gals, this is dangerous. There have been over 1,000 deaths in Virginia this year because of secondhand smoke. So I reached out to folks. I communicated with them. I listened to them. And at the end of the day, in 2009, the same piece of legislation passed in the Senate, it passed in the House, and it was signed into law by then Governor Kane. So I know how to work with people from both sides of the aisle. And at the end of the day, we all agree to disagree. That's the Virginia way. But at the end of the day, we do what's in the best interest of Virginia.
Next question will begin with you, Mr. Northam. The new head of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, last week effectively alienated pro-lifers from the Democratic Party. He said, and I quote, "Every Democrat, like every American, should support a woman's right to make her own choices about her body and her health. That is not negotiable." Do you agree with that statement?
No, it isn't negotiable. This is one of the most important issues for progressive Democrats across this country right now. And I can tell you that because I've been the leader of the fight. Since I've been in the legislature for the last 10 years, I have watched the following bills, to include the transvaginal ultrasound bill, which I stood up on the floor of the Senate and fought against and had the transvaginal taken off of it. I fought the personhood bill that would essentially make most forms of contraception that we use in 2017 unlawful. It would also make in vitro fertilization unlawful. I fought against the 20-week abortion ban. I fought against the trap laws that were intended to close down our women's reproductive health clinics. So it is a very, very important issue with women across the Commonwealth of Virginia and men. Reproductive freedom leads to economic freedom. And so I remind people all the time that there is no excuse that a group of legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, should be telling women what they should and shouldn't be doing with their bodies. That has to stop, and it takes leaders like myself to say that I'm pro-choice, there are no questions, and that's the way we're going to move forward as progressive Democrats in this country, and especially in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Mr. Perriello, your response.
Well, first, I want to thank Dr. Northam for his leadership on this. He really has been a fighter for women's rights in the legislature. We've seen over 70 pieces of regressive legislation introduced in the General Assembly just since 2010 alone, limiting a woman's right to choose or the meaningful affordability or access of that right to choose. In my belief, you cannot separate the issues of economic justice from the issues of reproductive justice. As we saw today, the cost of seeing a pregnancy through to term could be increased $15,000 just based on this bill passed through the Congress today. We must ensure that women have the right to make their own economic decisions, their own sovereign decisions, and that's not just about a constitutional right that exists on paper. It's also about the meaningfulness of the affordability and the dignity with which that right can be practiced. That's something that's on attack every day in the General Assembly. Governor McAuliffe has been in a position to veto it, and it's absolutely essential that we elect a Democratic governor this year to continue that process of being a firewall against these attacks on women's rights from the General Assembly in Richmond.
Mr. Perriello, next question is for you, and on the same topic, you both describe yourself then as pro-choice and for women's rights. Do you feel you would do a better job at fighting for women's reproductive rights than your opponent? And how would you do a better job?
Well, I'm going to try to be the best partner that I can to women across Virginia and to organizations that are in this fight every day, including Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and others. After Justice Gorsuch was ascended to the Supreme Court, we now stand one justice away from Roe v. Wade itself potentially being overturned. This is why I've proposed a constitutional amendment here in Virginia that would guarantee a woman's right to choose. We know that's going to be a long process here in Virginia, but these things don't happen overnight, and we need to be looking at all the scenarios that could develop going forward. We have to ensure, again, universal health care coverage, and that includes universal access to contraception. In the Affordable Care Act, we did include universal contraception coverage, but that's only for those who've gained coverage. We need to continue to see that expansion through and make this more affordable so that we can reduce the number of unwanted and unintended pregnancies here in Virginia. I believe in addition to this, the issues of pay equity are also important issues. Over 60% of minimum wage workers in Virginia are women, and it's not a coincidence. We systematically devalue the work that's done by women, where $7.25 an hour means only $14,000 a year. I was proud to fight for the Lilly Ledbetter Act when I was in Congress, and will continue to ensure not just that we look at the important issues of reproductive justice and access, but we look at pay equity, we look at the issue of sexual assault in our communities, and that we ensure that Virginia is an inclusive commonwealth for all, including women.
Mr. Northam,
well,
response?
thank you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. And I think women across the Commonwealth of Virginia realize that I've been the leader of the fight to protect women's access to reproductive health care. I'm very proud to have the endorsement of NARAL. That means a lot to me. They've watched me. They know I'm a leader in that area. I'm also a physician, so I understand some of those situations. I would make a couple of points. I appreciate the thought of the constitutional amendment that he is proposing. I would ask again, though, how is that going to happen with a Republican-controlled House and Senate? And that's to protect Roe versus Wade, which is important. But we need to talk about access, how we pay for the access, how we give women, the things that they need, not only for abortion care, but to screening, those types of things that they would get through places like Planned Parenthood. This is what we really need to fight for in Virginia at this time.
And Mr. Perriello, your name was mentioned. Do you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal?
Sure, I was very proud.
How are you going to do this with the Republican-controlled General Assembly?
Well, first, I was very proud to vote to protect Planned Parenthood funding when I was in Congress. It is an essential service provider across Virginia. We need to be prepared to redress any cuts that we see from the federal program. And I just want to say that as much as we may claim to be leaders, the reality is I think it's the organizations that have been leading this resistance the last couple of months. Despite President Trump's attempts to cut Planned Parenthood funding, because people marched, because women marched, you saw in the budget deal the other day that Planned Parenthood funding was protected. We have to never stop believing that resistance matters, and we won't let anyone else, even the president, tell us what is and isn't possible here in Virginia.
We have one final break, and then we will be back with a final segment with the candidates. We'll be right back. Yeah, and what was the second one? And put 50. Let me know. Okay, so guys, we're just a few seconds away. Everyone stand by. Stand by. We have a few more questions for the candidates. Welcome back to the Democratic debate as the two gubernatorial candidates talk about issues that matter to many of us. Mr. Northam, let's start with you and talk about the grocery tax. You mentioned it briefly earlier. You have proposed a change in the state's 1.5% grocery tax, which you called regressive. Tell us specifically what your plan is when it comes to the grocery tax, and more importantly, perhaps, how would you make up for that huge shortfall in tax revenue in Richmond?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I would say it's not a huge shortfall. And let me explain to you why that is. The grocery tax is very regressive. In other words, it affects people that can least pay for it, where more affluent people, it doesn't bother as much. So what I have proposed is to actually have a comprehensive tax reform plan where I sit both Democrats and Republicans down at the table and talk about ways that we can make our tax code in Virginia fairer, more progressive, and simpler. And so we could look at options such as phasing out the food tax for those that live below the poverty line. So in other words, it's not going to be for all Virginians. It's just going to be for the ones that make it or that it's regressive for. So it's not going to be a tremendous burden, especially if we phase it out, let's say, over 5 years. So there are ways to do that. Again, I want to re-emphasize also that while the tax code in Virginia is important, as a small business owner and talking to a lot of businesses that we are helping to grow in Virginia and also bringing businesses into the Commonwealth of Virginia, really what's most important for them at the top of their list is workforce development. They want to make sure that Virginia is able to train the future workers for the jobs of the 21st century. And that's why we have placed so much focus on the STEAM-related areas, making colleges and universities more affordable, and the G3 plan that I talked about for community colleges.
Mr. Perriello.
Well, we were told 3 weeks ago there'd be a comprehensive tax plan, then 2 weeks ago, then a week ago. I think it is important to put the details out there. And we've gotten credit even from conservative editorial boards for being willing to put very specific cuts on the table, hundreds of millions. Look at revenue raisers, including closing tax loopholes that seem to only benefit the largest corporations and leave small business behind, and asking those making $1 million a year to pay just a little bit more so that we can invest it in the universal pre-K and the community college programs and the rural broadband and the clean energy jobs and other things that actually grow our economy and grow the middle class and help us to expand that tax base over time. We've gone very specific on this, as we have on our details about criminal justice reform and things that can break the school-to-prison pipeline. We do need to make the tax code fair, but I think it's important as a leader to put those details on paper and show what you're willing to do. It's true you have to fight that through the legislature, but one of the keys is going to be to win back the legislature this year in the House of Delegates. I think we do that by putting bold, progressive ideas on the table that give people a reason to show up, and if we do that, I believe we can flip the House of Delegates this year in Virginia.
Mr. Northam, your response?
Well, again, and I think in having been there, and you asked the question earlier, how do we make things happen in Richmond? How do we work with both sides of the aisle? And I hope we win back the House of Delegates as well this year. We have a great chance to do that, but that still leaves the Senate, and that won't be until 2019. So in order to move a tax reform package through the legislature, it needs to be bipartisan support. It needs to be Republicans and Democrats that can sit down, come up with a comprehensive plan, and then move it forward and finally be signed by the governor, a tax plan that is fair, progressive, and simple for all Virginians.
Mr. Perriello,
I was just going to respond. As someone who's negotiated deals and been a peace negotiator around the world, I still think that starts by putting your own ideas on the table. It's true you don't get everything that you start with in a negotiation, but it's at least important to know where you stand and where you want to get to.
All right, we're going to try to move along to the next question. You have 15 seconds to respond if you'd like. All right, Mr. Perriello, we're going to move along to the next topic, and this has to do with gun control. You've been accused of flip-flopping on gun control, at one point getting an A rating from the NRA when you were in Congress, but recently criticizing the organization. A viewer, Lucas Bowman, has this question actually for both of you, but we'll start with Mr. Perriello. As a gun owner, what is your approach to keeping guns away from those who should not have them, while also looking out for those of us with guns? And that comes from Lucas Bowman.
It's a great question, Lucas, and I am someone who believes the Second Amendment protects a responsible right to bear arms, and I think that's entirely consistent with pursuing common sense gun safety reform here in Virginia and around the country. That's why I've been a strong advocate for universal background checks and closing the gun show loophole, promoting smart gun technology that can help keep children safe from gun accidents and other things. I meet very few gun owners who think it's a good idea that someone could buy a gun without any check on their prior criminal history, whether they're on a terrorist watch list, whether they've been convicted of domestic violence, and whether they have a history of mental instability. These are important things that can only be solved with a universal background check. I also believe it's important to move forward with limiting high-capacity magazines and certain weapon types. I believe we can come together, responsible gun owners and those who are gun safety advocates, to find common-sense solutions. The NRA at this point has become an even more extreme organization that thinks the answer to every gun problem is more guns in more places at more times. Unfortunately, they have come to represent gun makers and figure out how they can scare people into buying as many weapons as possible instead of representing responsible gun owners and our heritage. This is something I fought for after Congress as the head of the Center for American Progress and worked with formerly endorsed NRA members to try to find at least the modest steps that were proposed in the Manchin-Toomey bill to close the gun show loophole. In Virginia, we will need to be in a position to at least block the even more permissive laws coming out of the legislature, but also to look for common ground where we can bring people together to keep our communities safe.
Mr. Northam.
You know, I have been proud in my 10 years to stand up against the NRA. I have a D rating, which would not be good in school, and I don't shy away from that. I have a unique perspective on guns, quite frankly. I grew up on the Eastern Shore in a very rural area, but then I went and served in the United States Army. I took care of wounded soldiers during Desert Storm, so I know all too well what assault weapons do to human beings, and there's no excuse that we have assault weapons on our streets. I've also held toddlers in my arms that have picked up a loaded firearm on the bedside and either shot themselves or shot their siblings. I'm the one that has to give that news to parents. And I've also taken calls from victims of domestic violence, individuals that have had access to guns that shouldn't have. So I'm a fighter against the NRA. I'm proud of it. And, you know, we do need to stand up for things like universal background checks, like 1 gun a month, which used to be a law when Governor Wilder was in office. Smart gun technology so that only my fingerprint can discharge a gun. These are responsible gun ownership techniques that we can move forward with. And again, it has to take someone that can sit down, bring people from both sides of the aisle, find something that we can agree on, and then move forward.
That will be the final question of the evening. We are getting to that point where we need to move on to closing statements. You will each have 2 minutes to make a final statement to our viewers. And we will start with Mr. Northam.
Thank you, Jean, and thanks for being the moderator tonight, and thanks
welcome.
to the sponsors, and thanks for all of you that have taken interest to really get to know both candidates and learn about our visions for Virginia. You know, one thing that we learned in 2016 was that these elections have tremendous, tremendous consequences. And not only do we have a chance to harness this energy that we're seeing across the Commonwealth of Virginia and take it to the polls so that we elect a Democratic governor, attorney general, and lieutenant governor, but as we said earlier, we have a great chance this year to pick up our majority back in the House of Delegates. It's time for Democrats to get back on offense and stop playing so much defense. So Virginians around the Commonwealth, they deserve a leader, a governor that will stand up to what's going on the other side of the Potomac River. They deserve a leader that knows how to win statewide. They deserve a leader that will stand up unwaveringly for progressive democratic values. And they deserve a leader that will continue to promote economic opportunity for all Virginians, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. Someone that will fight for our children to make sure that they have the same opportunities that I had when I was growing up. Someone that will fight for our families, our parents, so that they can raise their children just like Pam and I did. You know, as a pediatrician, as you might understand, I have held a lot of babies in my arms, and I've looked into their eyes. And let me tell you what I see. I see affection and joy and hope. I don't see the hatred and the bigotry that we so often see in adults. So my question and why I want to be the 73rd governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia is to make sure that those children grow up and that they live in communities where they are inclusive, where they're welcoming, where the lights are on, that they have access to good health care, that they have access to a world-class education system, and that they live in environments that are clean, have clean water and clean air. So that's my commitment to you as the next governor. I would be honored to have your vote on June the 13th and your support, and then as we move forward to November the 7th. We can do this together. We're all in this together. Let's take Virginia to the next level. Thank you all so much, and God bless all of you.
And Mr. Perriello, please, Mr. Perriello, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Virginia's meant everything to me and my family. My father was the son of an Italian immigrant. They didn't have a lot growing up in West Virginia, but he got a local scholarship to come across the mountains and go to the University of Virginia. For him, that was the ticket into the middle class and the American dream. He worked hard and did work study, but he came out like we used to have it, debt-free and able to start saving and raising a family in Albemarle County. Today, when our children do the things we ask them to do, play by the rules, work hard, and make their way into a four-year college, we reward them with a degree and $35,000 in student debt. A few years later, typically today, they have to go back for a second degree and more debt. What used to be a cycle of savings and a pathway into the middle class has become a nightmare cycle of debt. And that's for the lucky ones who are able to make it to college, as opposed to those who are coming out of high school and looking at other opportunities. We have to reimagine the American dream for a new generation, because in addition to the challenges of globalization we've faced already, over 35 to 50% of jobs in Virginia could be affected by automation in the next 10 to 15 years, as deep learning and artificial intelligence kicks in. Consolidation has been crushing small businesses, so that the unemployment rate tells us less and less about how many people are having to work how many jobs to be able to get their bills paid. We need leaders who are looking a generation ahead, not at the challenges of yesterday, but at the challenges of tomorrow. I believe we're going to have to develop a new system of workforce development in which people are in and out of those programs over a career, and where we're seeing that as an investment and not as a favor, where we're giving small business a chance to be part of the new energy economy of tomorrow instead of the pipelines of the past. We need to make sure that we're looking at the climate and clean energy jobs of the future, that we're looking at how to localize food production and manufacturing production. That's what I learned from the people of Southside Virginia. I've spent the last 20 years of my life fighting for basic fairness and justice across Virginia and across the world. I believe we can bring that kind of energy and a new generation of ideas to Richmond that can serve the goals we have here in Virginia of justice, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. Thank you very much.
Good job. Very good. Three more, right?
Something like that.
The food count, right?
Thank you. The primary is June 13th between these two Democratic candidates. We hope tonight's debate helps you to understand more clearly what the two candidates